there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 2 and the finale of our coping sled build. So with those holes drilled, we'll just put these threaded inserts into our 3/8 holes and crank them down until they are flush with the stock. Just like that. So put them both in, and then we'll move on to what to do about the hardware that screws into this. So now that the threaded rod insert or the threaded inserts are in, I have these threaded jig knobs, and the problem is I don't have ones that are long enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin these in all the way to the bottom, and then from the underside I'm going to put a 1/4 inch dowel up inside of here, mark it where it's flush with these jig knobs screwed all the way down tight, and then add maybe I would say an 1/8 to a 1/4 of an inch, enough so that it's kind of like a piston that will drive down to bend this and hold our sacrificial board in place. Once I get those dowels in there and I can loosen things off, then with the screws that are the holes that I drilled here and countersunk, I'm then going to place this thin piece of the plastic up inside this slot here, and I'm going to screw it in place. Well, I ended up cutting some 1-inch lengths of oak dowel, 1/4 inch diameter. I'm just going to drop those in those holes right there. And like I said, this threaded or this piece of plastic now, the thinner one that we cut, is going to get mounted right in there. So I'll pre-drill that and then screw them in using some number 6 by 3/4 screws. And now with that piece secured in there with the screws, as you put your sacrificial piece into this slot and you crank down on these, you can see that piece of plastic coming down as you tighten these knobs, and that will pin it inside of that dado and keep it nice and secure so that you can concentrate on your work instead of that sacrificial piece slipping. Well, the next thing that we want to do here is mount our fence to our base plate. So I'm going to clamp this all in very carefully and just double check things to make sure things are square. Then I'm going to place some marks on the bottom, drill some countersunk holes, and with some number 8 by probably 1.5 inch screws, I'm going to attach our fence to our base plate. And there you go, there's the fence mounted. You just want to make sure that these screws that you mount it with are really well countersunk so that they're not interfering or scratching up your router table. Now you can see here that this sacrificial piece is quite loose, but if we just turn these knobs down as they were designed to do, now that piece is sturdy in there, and we can adjust it and not have to worry about it slipping all over the place. Great little way to hold that in place. Now the next piece we want to install and cut and install rather will be a support for this fence. And although it is a beefy fence, I still would like one support just here on this edge. Now our fence support will also be a piece of hardwood. It'll be 3/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to use maple, and you're going to want it to be 2.5 inches wide and 4.25 inches long. So this particular support piece, once you have the initial dimensions cut, this is going to have a taper on it as well. So 1.5 inches back from the front edge and 1.5 inches up from the bottom, just like that. And we will join those 2 lines, and they will, I will trim that off and sand it, and then we're going to mount it to our jig. And this piece will get mounted right there on the, if you're standing from behind it, it'll be on the right side of the fence. So we're going to screw into this from up underneath with 2 screws, and as well we're going to remove this sacrificial piece and drill and countersink from the inside of the fence with another number 8 screw to get this nice and secure. It actually doubles as not only a support for the fence, but as well it's protection for your hands, because this is where the router will be spinning, and should you ever lose thought or whatever, it keeps your hand from going out and into the spinning bit. Well, the next thing we need is a handle, and all I've done here with a 3/4 piece of walnut, I've just simply traced a tried and true handle being a handsaw, and then modified it so that it would sit in my jig comfortably. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch roundover and round over all the inside and outside edges, with the exception of our square corner, of course. And then, just like I did with this edge piece here, I am going to screw this handle in place so that it'll be nice and sturdy and able to be usable. And that is our handle, nicely rounded and sanded and attached onto our jig. The last thing to do here with this particular jig at this point now is we need to add the hold downs. And for that I'm going to use a lever action style hold down. And I was considering how to do it because I want the hold downs to be in this area, but depending on how long the arm is of the hold down, you would be limited to what you could place into this jig. So what I'm hoping to do is mount my hold downs to a piece of 1/2 inch ply that I would be able to adjust in and out with my 2 hold downs in to get a certain distance of maximum and minimum work pieces into this jig. So I know that sounds confusing, but let's start with cutting a piece of ply, shall we? Well, I've cut a piece of 1/2 inch ply 6 inches by 6.5 inches. And I think the way that I'd like this to work is I have the 2 lever clamps mounted here, or they will be mounted rather, on this piece of plywood. And I'd like to be able to adjust them front to back sort of thing so that we can vary our pieces of width in this jig. What I would like to do is I would like to route a 5/16 groove in this piece right here, and then once I get that routed, I want to mount a T-bolt into this jig, countersinking on the other side, so that this particular piece here can be slid back and forth to its maximum or its smallest measurement here, and then you could back these clamps off, tighten them down to get your maximum width of board into the jig like that. So I think what we're going to start with is the 5/16 groove that will be placed in this particular board here. And for that, we're going to use the router table. The groove is cut, and from here you just need to position your clamps and slide this along and adjust and make sure that everything is going to line up the way that you want. And I'm going to drill a 1/4 20 hole. I've already marked it here, and that will be for my threaded T-bolt. The next step now is I'm going to take one of these T-bolts and I'm going to place it inside of that hole that I just drilled. I'm going to line it up so that it's facing the orientation I want, and I'm going to trace around it. Once I finish tracing, I'm going to use my trim router and I'm going to gouge this out so that this T-bolt can sit flush inside of our base, and then from there I will be able to mount that sliding board. So with that T-bolt mounted flush into the bottom of our jig, or our sled rather, we should just be able to place this on top. We've got a fender washer here, and we should just be able to use a jig knob, spin it on there, line it up the way that we want, and crank it down to have it secure. And it is quite secure. I was concerned that with only one knob on there that it may have shifting. The only thing left to do now is take this piece off, and we are going to mount our two hold downs just like that. So we'll mount them on this inside edge, as you can see here, closest to the fence, and that will give us the most adjustment here out of our particular clamps. So it's 8 holes and some countersunk nuts and bolts. I don't think a video is required, so I'm going to mount these, and I'll see you when I get back. And we have our adjustable board mounted on there, as well as the lever clamps mounted. Truth be told, I didn't have the proper nuts and bolts, so for now I use some number 10 by 1/2 inch screws. I will be swapping these out for countersinking the bolts underneath and nutting it on top. I really don't like the idea of this just being screwed into this 1/2 inch ply with upward pressure all the time from these clamps. I think eventually it's going to wear, so I'd rather have nuts and bolts. It's a pretty simple jig. It's a simple concept. I know it took a bit to make, but it would be worth it in the end. Just the safety factor alone and improving the ability to run the narrow stock perfectly horizontal through your bit, or sorry, perfectly at 90 degrees. So you have your sacrificial piece, and that just slides into your dado that we cut at the first part, and it could overhang to whatever distance you need it throughout here. You would set up your bit, set up your fence the best you can, and get it out of your way. Set your bit to the correct size, and then you can bring your fence up and have a stop block here, kind of to like a setup block. An extra 3/4 of an inch on here that you could slide your stock up to butt it up for your routing. Then you know you're in the right position. But either way, you put in your sacrificial board. You'll tighten down these little knobs, which compress that 1/4 inch plastic and make this rock solid. I mean, that thing's not going anywhere. And if this was just pretending now to be our board, that would be lined up, of course, with the edge of here, with the edge of your sacrificial board, and there would be a registry board here, like I said, that you could butt it up against. From there, just a one-time setup. Just align your clamp, see where you want it. I think right about there is good, that's center. So give this a tighten, and just like before, this is rock solid as well. So hold your stock in place, lock down clamp 1, lock down clamp 2, fire up your router, and run it through for the pass. That's it. That's it. I mean, spectacular. I really dig this jig. It's a dig jig, a jig dig. Either way, great little jig, this coping sled. Really looking forward to using it coming up in a project soon. It's solid, it slides really well, no side-to-side play whatsoever, and I'm quite pleased with this adjustable clamp here. So it's as simple as a little twist, and you could adjust it for, I'm not sure the size that this takes in total, You're looking at almost 7 inches. So this one will take 6.5 inches for the biggest piece to route. And I don't know, I really dig it. I think it's great. And I hope you guys have liked the build as well. And there you have it. A coping sled. Guys, this is a great project. It goes a long way to helping you improve your joinery when it comes to doing rail and stile, because with the workpiece clamped in and always held in place and always held perfectly square to that router bit, you can't help but get consistently good results that way. Much better setup than the makeshift one that I used in the rail and stile demonstration video a little while back. Fantastic jig, fantastic project. And you know, did I go over the top a little bit with the plastic and all that stuff? Well, maybe I did. Maybe I did. But you know what? I've said it before. It's my show. Guys, I want to thank you for joining me again this week for this build. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to thank Robert for giving me that suggestion and asking about the coping sled, because I've enjoyed this and it's really going to come in handy in my shop, and I hope that it's going to come in handy in yours as well. Guys, thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video.